I DoorDashed a single can of Bud Light and
Radio Free Infinite episode 249. You know what's kind of an underrated genre? Norwegian black metal.
정적이어가지고.
No, I'm being serious. Norwegian black metal, pretty underrated stuff. I guess I should be a little bit more specific. I'm talking about Norwegian black metal that came out after the initial explosion of Burzum, Mayhem, Immortal, Darkthrone, Enslaved, and Gorgoroth. The late 90s, early 2000s Norwegian black metal as everybody's eyes turned towards the trendier scenes going on in Sweden, Finland, and France. It wasn't like Norway just gave up, and there were plenty of very innovative bands doing stuff around that time. Bands like Odium, Tullus, Flurity, hell, even most of the Gehenna stuff came out years after the initial media blitz of the old school Norwegian black metal bands. And yeah, if you're one of these people that only sees all metal as progressing towards Burzum and then there's nothing better that can come after that, you probably don't give a shit about most of these bands. You probably run a whole website complaining about all of it, and you probably write memorial articles about Coolio to flex on how much cooler you are than all of the metal peons. But I don't know what kind of hipster douchebag would do something like that. Sorry, I had something caught in my throat. But yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about this week. Some of that latter-day Norwegian black metal stuff. Specifically the band Covenant, who were headed up by a man named Nagash, who is a slightly controversial figure in metal, particularly if you were to ask the guys in Aryan terrorism.
I denounce anti-Semitism in all its forms, and I stand with my friends in the Jewish community.
Who had an entire verse dedicated to their distaste for this Nagash character in the immortal black metal diss track classic, Crush the Lies.
Motherfucking Covenant is beyond any hatred. That homosexual bastard, Nagash, we shall cut through his ass with chainsaw.
What the heck did you just bloody say about me, you little wanker?
And it's not even like with a chainsaw or with the chainsaw. It's with chainsaw, the platonic form of chainsaw. There's no article before this chainsaw. That's how mad he is at him. And that particular section of that song always struck me as a little bit odd because all of the other bands that they make clear their distaste for were like big corporate bands, you know, Dimmu Borgir, Emperor Marduk, Behemoth, but Covenant weren't ever like really that super duper huge. And you think, well, maybe it's because Nagash guested in Dimmu Borgir and they obviously don't like Dimmu Borgir very much. But then at the same time, why don't they have a verse talking about Old Man's Child? I mean, Galder's been doing the Dimmu Borgir thing even longer than Nagash has. But I think I know what's going on here. See, pretty much every band mentioned in this song is one that the songwriter sees as having sold out, you know, done like a big mainstream style change. And that songwriter, of course, is Vargoth, the main guy behind Nocturnal Mortem. And when I listen to older Covenant stuff, I can hear a whole lot of Nocturnal Mortem in it, so I'm pretty sure they were a big influence on Nocturnal Mortem, and when they, you know, sold out or whatever, Vargoth took it very personally. Early Covenant is kind of confusing, because they started in like 1992, but they didn't get anything out until 1997 as far as official album releases go, and in the meantime, Nagash also started a solo black metal project called Troll that actually got their first album out a year before the first Covenant album. And that first Troll album, Drep de Kristna, an album title that I'm sure the guys in X-Toll are thrilled about, kind of sticks out to me as essentially being the real first Covenant album. But whatever you think of it as, it's definitely one of my favorite weird, spooky, symphonic black metal releases. It starts out with a very long intro with a whole bunch of music evolving out of this single droning tone that you're hearing right now. And I think this may have been one of the biggest influences Troll and later Covenant had on Nocturnal Mortem, because if you've ever listened to the Nocturnal Mortal album Goat Horns, not Goat Whore, but Goat Horns,
you know, being silly ass like a big ass cigar, right?
You'll remember that album had a very long, entirely synthesizer-based intro entitled Black Moon Overture. And what set that intro apart from the legion of overly long black metal intros that are nothing but stupid, cheesy wind noises,
Paysage d'hiver.
sorry, I got something caught in my throat again, was its sense of forward motion and musical complexity. And I gotta think this intro to the first Troll album might be the first instance of a really complex black metal intro like that, where it actually has some musical weight to it. Either them or Enslaved on their third album, but Nocturnal Mortem sounds a whole lot more like Troll than Enslaved on their early work. And then the black metal kicks in. And I almost wish October was a couple weeks longer, because this is some really good spooky symphonic black metal with fast and furious arpeggiated keyboard phrases. Guitar sound is cold, artificial, and raw, very much in keeping with a lot of the more moonfog-oriented guitar sounds that were going around Norway around this time. The whole thing very much has an early Emperor feel to it, but it's like the guitars are only playing the Samoth parts, and all the Isan parts, all that complicated stuff is being done mostly by the keyboard. But here's something you don't hear a lot in Emperor. Total black thrash riffs really work to kind of help this album stand out. That weird artificial cold guitar sound playing these very thrashy riffs in the middle of their atmospheric black metal. That thrash component will become more important later on. But right now, I kind of want to talk about the keyboards because that's definitely the standout element of this release. In fact, my favorite song on the album is literally just drums and keyboards, the wonderfully titled Trollberg. And appropriate enough for a song whose title in English translates to Mountain of the Trolls. The song is both goofy and gleefully evil, and it's also an absolute earworm with that evil polka piano and those really well done choirs. Here comes a cool little bit of melodic counterpoint. Those very intentionally artificial sounding sort of cyber horns, weird but oddly fitting. And we bring back in that piano from earlier, starting out as a lone melodic lead line before adding another piano layer, as well as some rather haunting and again, rather intentionally artificial sounding strings. I can see a lot of dungeon synth people getting into this album. It has that very unique atmosphere to it, where if the synth patches were more realistic sounding, it honestly lessened the music's impact. Wrap it all up with a nice bow, bringing those choral vocals back in. No lyrics of any kind in the song, it's just a whole lot of oh, and yeah, it works. It's really, really good. This song's always stuck with me. This album's always stuck with me. It's a great fucking album. It's really short though, but that about does it for Troll in its initial incarnation, as Nagash managed to get a proper band going with another gentleman named Blackheart, that band being Covenant. And in many ways, that first Troll album is essentially sort of like a prequel to what goes on in Covenant. They're both very similar, although Covenant is much more guitar-oriented. Their first album, In Times Before the Light, is heavily dependent on these super catchy melodic tremolo-picked guitar phrases. I'm also a big fan of Nagash's drum work, which utilizes a whole lot of interesting accents and fills a very ride cymbal heavy double bass beats. Obviously he's no Hellhammer, but he does a good job with the sort of atmospheric black metal material, especially since, as you can tell, these songs have lots of different shifting parts in them and you have to stitch them all together, especially when he hits the real big epic heavy turnaround. These songs are long and atmospheric, but not droning in the same way a band like Emperor or Darkthrone is.
On the storms to howl again.
They also can be a whole lot cheesier than either of those two bands. But, you know, you still got your brutal black metal, tremolo, blast beat combo riffs leading you out of the song. It's fine. It's black metal. It's great black metal. I'm not saying it was like totally reinventing the wheel or anything, even for 1996, but if this album had come out in like 2019 on Werewolf Records, all you nerds would be getting a boner over it.
It's the truth.
You probably heard the midpoint of that particular song sample. They still got plenty of keyboards. And again, much like that Troll album, some of this album's best moments are entirely predicated upon the performance of those keyboards. For instance, we have one of the best exhibitions of Norwegian black metal piano that I can think of. Now, if you don't know about Norwegian black metal piano, oh boy, let me tell you, this is some good stuff. You can use it for moody, atmospheric tricks like Satyricon did back when they were a good band. Love that little high-pitched flourish at the end. Very atmospheric. Or you can get all crazy Yngwie J. Malmsteen neoclassical shreddy with it like Arcturus did. There's another symphonic black metal earworm for you. Fall a Man off their first album, Asperahium Symphonia. Hell, even Troll indulged in some pretty stellar piano work on their first album. I don't know, I guess everybody was smoking on that Edvard Grieg shit back in the day. The song Dragon Storms, off of the first Covenant album, features one of my favorite Norwegian black metal piano breaks. In fact, pretty much all of the different keyboard parts in the song are exceptionally well done. Got these big, bombastic, aggressive brass and choral stings at the beginning of the song. Super goofy fill leading into total Arcturus style, wintry, arctic, icy keyboard madness. This is like black metal comfort food, especially with those croaky Abbott-style vocals. But here comes that dank piano part I've been building up so much. So obviously that's pretty sexy. The layered counterpoint to it is something else. It starts out with this catchy little bit of synthesized strings kind of bouncing off that initial piano melody before they layer in some really cool choir vocals. Also shout out again in Nagash for that cool kind of almost sort of post-punkish drum part, a little bit danceable. And back into the piano stuff, which, as you probably gathered by now, I think is amazing. And apparently, despite the general opinion of the metal scene regarding Covenant nowadays, back when this album came out, everybody thought it was pretty amazing too. Amazing enough that they managed to get signed to a major label, Nuclear fucking Blast, for their next album. Not only that, but you might remember I mentioned Hellhammer, the drummer, and Jan Axel von Blomberg from Mayhem and Arcturus earlier. Well, the very same Hellhammer ended up joining the band as their drummer for their second album. They also got Sverd, the main composer and keyboard player for Arcturus, to join the band. And they even got a new second guitarist, Estenu, who had been working with Nagash and Dimmu Borgir. Nagash ended up joining Dimmu Borgir in 1996. So this album, Nexus Polaris, probably the beginning of Covenant being a controversial band. I remember back in the day I first heard this album specifically because it had Hellhammer and Sverd on it, and I thought it was pretty great. Then maybe about 10 years ago I listened to it again and I was like, dude, this fucking sucks. But because I'd been listening to that Troll album and the first Covenant album a whole bunch in the prior weeks before this episode, I was like, I should give Nexus Polaris another shot. And I don't know if it's because I've been going so heavy on the cringe, nay, Japanese gothic metal stuff. But upon further review, Nexus Polaris fucking slaps. It's very different from even earlier Covenant, which may have been why I did not enjoy this album upon my initial reappraisal of it about 10 years ago. And not even necessarily due to the new keyboardist and the new drummer. It more has to do with how the guitars are done. You remember how I mentioned that the slight thrash influences would become important later on? Well, this is when that becomes a thing. Because this album is essentially a tech thrash album and a gothic power metal album masquerading as a black metal album. And as far as that goes, it's very well done. There's a whole lot of palm muting on the guitar, much more than would be normal for black metal, and the melodies are quite a bit catchier than one might be used to for this genre. I mean, there's still plenty of blast beats and tremolo pit guitar riffs, but even on sections like that, it's like they can't help themselves. Watch this rhythmic variation. It's like, oh, we gotta bring the palm mutes in, dude. This is a thrash album. It definitely fits in with a larger trend that was going on in Norway at the time with bands like Bedblunds, Enda, Arcturus, Florides, Spiral Architect. A whole lot of black metal people getting way better at their instruments and moving towards technicality. Female vocals on this album provided by Sarah Jezebel Deva, most famous for being in Cradle of Filth.
Incredible, smooth muscle control.
Well, we won't hold that against her too much because she did a whole lot of great work with my boy Mortis as well. And this whole weird blend of like gothic metal, power metal, black metal, and tech thrash is honestly something I haven't really heard outside of Japan that much. Speaking of power metal, how about them folky riffs? So overall, a high-quality, sort of weird neoclassical prog metal album with black metal aesthetics layered on top, mostly in the form of the vocals. The weirdest song on here, Chariots of Thunder, I initially thought was a Bathory cover. I couldn't remember what album it was on. I figured it was like one of the Nordland albums, but then I was like, wait a minute! Those didn't come out until 4 years after this album.
You created a time paradox.
Turns out I was actually thinking about a lyrical couplet from the 1988 Bathory album Bloodfire Death. That said, the Covenant song Chariots of Thunder is sort of like a weird tech thrash reinterpretation of Hammerheart era Bathory, with a whole lot of weird electronic keyboard sounds added. I mean, granted, the clean vocals there are a little bit cheesy, but once the song gets going properly, it turns into this weird, spooky, gothic take on Bathory with a whole lot of like strange keyboards and eerie narration that gradually unfolds into these like overlapping neoclassical melodies. Speaking of which, check this part out. sick little melodic fill followed by some total tech thrash riffage, and yet there's this like stompy Manowar beat under it. Weird fucking song. Bizarre combination of styles, but it works really well, and I think that's a good description of pretty much this entire album. And then Der Ervig Swede shows up to ruin everything, because it turns out there was like a Swedish industrial electronic band called Covenant, sued our Covenant out of their name, and they had to change their name to The Covenant with a K, and with that name came a style change towards some kind of like industrial, vaguely Rammstein-ish stuff that I didn't really care for that much. I'd rather just listen to Godkiller. But there was one more major contribution from Nagash to the true black metal canon. That being when he joined up with Silenaz from Dimmu Borgir and Svartalv from Gehenna on the first Nocturnal Breed album. It's one of my all-time favorite thrash metal albums, and I don't know when else I'm gonna get a chance to talk about it, so here we go.
We'll do it live! Fuck it!
First of all, it's got two of my favorite thrash metal riffs. One of them being on the song Nocturnal Breed, which is like a total Sodom Germanic-styled thrash break. And obviously that's incredible. And the other one is this sort of weird melodic death metal take on a Destruction style hammer-on pull-off tech thrash riff on the song Maggot Master. So fucking good, dude. One of the greatest thrash metal songs of all time, and it's hidden away on this like mid-90s album. More people need to hear this one. Check out this cool little part right here. They kind of like blend the solo with that initial riff melody. Really fucking outstanding thrash metal album. But in the context of an episode about Covenant, there's a few moments on here that may be of interest to you.
야, 나를 완전 제대로 잡.
Now I know it just sounds like thrash metal right now, but give it a minute, I promise. It's gonna get way weirder and more atmospheric, and very Covenant adjacent. Right after this little mid-paced bruiser of a riff set. Really like how mean the guitar sound on this album is, but here, check this part out. What do you even call this part, man? Symphonic thrash metal? It's certainly interesting, and I think it should be of interest to people that are into Covenant. In fact, why not just pretend that the more symphonic, melodic-oriented songs on this album are the actual Third Covenant album instead of their later stuff that I obviously can't really stand at all. But there you go. That's what's going on with Covenant before they turned into The Covenant. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Hopefully you learned something new. Even if you didn't, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
You survived the first test. Oh, thank God! But I have some bad news. What? You're going back.